The K-Thal War Envoy demanded an explanation as 3 of their outer sensor webs collapsed without warning, stripped from orbit in synchronized precision before their defense AI could even acknowledge the loss. And while his voice echoed in the grand diplomatic chamber, carved from living coral and suspended over the neutral moon of Deari, Commander Eva Marin of the human vessel Naraka remained perfectly still at the edge of the council table, her voice calm, clipped, and utterly void of apology as she explained that Earth's observation fleet had only exercised its right to self-masking in contested space under Article 17 subsection C of the Interstellar Contact Charter, and that any subsequent disarray in ascendancy infrastructure was therefore a matter of internal technical failure and not of hostile engagement. She did not blink when the Velari Chancellor rose beside the envoy with a ripple of biolight casting judgment across her lacquered mandibles, and accused Earth of provocation through silence, sabotage through suggestion, a form of warfare so insidious it required no weapon signature, no fleet formation, just the absence of expected presence in the places they watched most closely. Marin's fingers remained folded behind her back, the creases of her uniform crisp with the precision of ritual, and when she finally spoke again, it was with a tone that left no room for argument, not because it was loud or forceful, but because it was the tone of someone who had measured every consequence and accepted all of them long before the first word left her lips. The Ascendancy conducted a purge on Rexer 9 using a method designed to leave no trace, no witnesses, and no declaration, and yet you accuse us of aggression for demanding acknowledgement through demonstration rather than words, when your own sub-commanders scrubbed the colony logs and sealed the genetic markers of those executed. Beneath layers of radiation camouflage and orbital misdirection, there was a long pause after that, filled only by the subtle hum of the station's life support and the slow coiling motion of the Grax observer's sensory arms as he recorded emotional temperature shifts across the room. And it was during that silence that Rear Admiral Nuko entered the chamber from the auxiliary corridor, her presence unexpected by the council, but not by Marin, who nodded once as Nuoko stepped to her side and laid a single polished data cube on the table without explanation. Every council member has already received a copy of this, the Admiral said evenly, her voice low and formal and unmistakably human, and each file within it has been triple verified through third-party astrometric networks, coded through encryption standards accepted even by Velari courts. So what you are about to witness is not a human allegation. It is a historical certainty requiring response. No one moved as the cube activated, and a holographic image bloomed above the table, showing not warships or burning skies, but the frozen stillness of a colonial nursery as atmosphere vented through a breach in the wall, and the room filled with the sound of recorded breathing, shallow, rapid, then gone. The Velari Chancellor stepped back as if burned, not because the image shocked her, but because it was not supposed to exist, and for the first time, the balance of authority in the chamber tilted without announcement, not toward violence, not toward threats, but toward a quiet and undeniable momentum. The Naraka, still cloaked in high orbit, began cycling its Omega protocols, not in secret, not in warning, but in full compliance with the legal precedent established when the Grun incinerated Valsa Prime. And as its black hole adjusted position by fractional degrees, aligning its silent weapon ports with known ascendancy relay stations, the universe began to understand what Earth had built beneath its silence. The black ship had not come for dialogue. Not first, and not alone. It had come to deliver memory, and to wait for judgment to follow. The Velari delegation withdrew from the chamber without ceremony, leaving behind only the flicker of their vacated presence, encoded in the luminous residue of their environmental shielding. And for a moment, no one in the council spoke, because silence in diplomacy is not absence, but tension measured in breath and posture, and because the evidence projected above them remained unanswered, untwisted by rhetoric, immutable by decree. Rear Admiral Nuoko did not watch them leave. Her eyes instead fixed on the Grax observer, who had remained in his corner, seat with limbs folded in spiraled thought. His species known not for emotion, but for their unwavering archival integrity, and when he finally turned his primary eye toward her, it was not with disbelief, but with deliberate attention, the kind given only to forces that had shifted the vector of a system. The broadcast from Rexer 9 was filtered through 3 masking nets, he said, each word carefully pronounced through the translator node embedded in his thoracic ridge. And yet you recovered it with fidelity. This implies surveillance technologies not disclosed to the Council Registry. Nuoko inclined her head slightly, the gesture more acknowledgement than answer, and Marin responded in her place, her voice retaining the same surgical stillness it always carried under pressure, a quality that unnerved many, but gave her command teams absolute confidence when stakes fractured protocol. Humanity has observed much since our admission to this council, but we do not disclose tools built only for survival unless the threat is existential, and what was done on Rexer 9 was not a border conflict, nor political leverage, but an erasure designed to rewrite what happened before it could be remembered. The key, thou. Envoy's dorsal lights shifted from crimson to dim violet, the species equivalent of contemplative neutrality, and he extended one long digit toward the cube now dim on the table, as if it might offer different truths from a different angle. You waited almost a standard year before revealing this, he said, and there was no accusation in his voice, only calculation, which means you did not intend immediate retaliation. So, why now? Nuoko exhaled, the only visible crack in her otherwise unreadable facade, and Marin gave the answer without turning. Because the black ship is ready, across the system, buried beneath lunar crust, cloaked under 6 layers of quantum interference and orbit rotation masking. The Naraka opened its final deployment channel and synchronized its onboard AI with Earth Command's Omega Relay, a channel hard-coded into every human deep space protocol with one purpose alone, to transition from evidence to enforcement. Once consensus failed, it was not an act of war, it was the execution of a dormant clause written in the ashes of Saul's first interstellar treaty. The one Earth had signed reluctantly, having learned from a century of watching civilizations rise through conquest and collapse under arrogance, and the clause had one name known to all species who read human law closely: protocol Omega, a signal, not of fury, but of finality. The Grax observer adjusted his limbs, clicking in silent communion with his internal processors, then spoke without emotion, yet not without weight. Then let the record reflect. Earth has activated its right of precedent. Through validated proof, an unchallenged claim of harm, if no restitution is offered within 72 hours. Enforcement actions will be recognized as lawful under Section 12 of the Galactic Charter. No one raised objection, because no one could refute what had already been shown, because the Naraka had not fired a single shot, and already the balance of power had begun to shift. In the cold reaches of Sector Delta 9, a Valari relay station designated Voxer 7 ceased transmission at exactly 3 o'clock Universal Time. Its final outbound signal, corrupted by what appeared to be random static, but upon deeper scan, revealed a recursive sequence of hex data Earth standard encryption, embedded within Valari-Com protocols last updated over a decade prior, meaning only one thing to those with the intelligence clearance to see it clearly. The humans had been inside the system long before the Naraka ever left Sol orbit. The Ascendancy's fleet Strategos, High Warden Calistrax, stood before the tactical display as the relay failure confirmed, his secondary limbs tightening at his sides, while the main pair flicked through sub-channel reports from 5 distant sectors, each one whispering of similar anomalies, slight fluctuations in navigation drift, ghost pings across deep space scanners, memory loops in signal archives where none should exist. and no pattern but one they had all occurred near roots once connected to Rexer 9, a junior tactician young. For his caste, but decorated murmured the words none dared make official. They're not probing us. They're mapping us. Callus turned, slow and deliberate, his crest pulsing deep blue in warning, because speaking aloud what must be denied was itself a dangerous thing in ascendancy halls. But the thought had already taken root, spreading through. The bridge, like the cold breath of entropy mapping, was not the action of a vengeful species seeking dramatic retaliation. It was the behavior of a predator calculating routes of collapse and worse. It suggested patience Earth had no need to declare. War, not with the Naraka in play, because war was a term used for conflict between equals. But this was doctrine, precision, and something far colder than hate Drax deactivated the display and opened a secure line to the Central Ascendancy Council, bypassing protocol layers through the override code granted only to wartime executives. And when the Chancellor's image flickered into form, her expression unreadable beneath ceremonial veils, he did not wait for her greeting. They know too much, and they are using it with surgical timing. This is not retribution. Chancellor, this is a campaign designed to fracture us from the inside. And I recommend full fleet dispersal immediately, with fallback to perimeter strongholds and aggressive shielding of our diplomatic data cores. The Chancellor's veil shifted in slow degrees. Her silence longer than it should have been. Then her voice emerged soft and crisp, like knives hidden beneath silk. If we disperse now, we lose the face of control. And if we appear fractured, the lesser coalitions will align with Earth to protect themselves not out of loyalty, but from fear of being next. Drax stepped closer to the transmission lens, his voice lowering. They have already aligned, Chancellor. Whether in statement or silence, Faro Station will not stop them. The Grax will not protect us. And the humans have made it clear they do not need numbers, only leverage. For a moment, the chamber remained still. Then the Chancellor issued her final command. Deploy fleet mantics to Zone Epsilon, but do not engage unless fired upon. Use them as bait. And prepare the diplomatic cloisters to receive terms in the event Earth extends. Its hand in parley. Drax's eyes narrowed as he processed her implication. But he did not argue, because the Ascendancy had reached the moment they were never supposed to face. Not when the war began, but when Earth decided it was over. Naraka moved through deep space without propulsion signatures, its hull rendering ambient radiation into navigational silence. Every vector calculated to avoid gravitational distortion that might betray its presence. And inside the command deck, Commander Marin stood before the forward holosphere, as lines of red marked newly exposed Velari fuel routes, data streamed directly from a covert human array buried within the debris belt of the Kellner Expanse. Lieutenant Reese, her operations chief and a former cyber warfare analyst from Earth's Strategic Insight Cores, leaned slightly toward the holofield, his voice quiet and composed, laced with the clarity of someone who saw warfare not in explosions or troop counts, but in the logic of systems unraveling from within. They've already begun decentralizing supply chains, just as we expected. But what's curious is the absence of counter-interference. No signal traps, no false data nodes, not even a trace of feedback looping, as if they're deliberately showing us the gaps. Marin didn't look away from the map as she replied, her voice low, deliberate, and without rhetorical weight. They're inviting us to see their weaknesses, because they believe we won't strike before a formal threshold is crossed, and because they still think we're bound by the old diplomatic codes that restrained us when they slaughtered Rexer 9 under veiled orders and claimed it was planetary instability. Reese nodded once, then adjusted the feed to overlay economic dependencies between Velari colonies and the now compromised transit lines. The chains of consumption and production no longer hidden, each one pulsing with quiet vulnerability. It would take 2 strikes, he said, One here to cut their argon plasma supply for orbital engines, and one here to sever cryomed shipments. To their border settlements, non-lethal, purely economic, but the psychological effect would cascade, especially if we do it without leaving any technological fingerprint. Marin stepped back from the display, turning toward the command dais where the ship's AI interface waited, its presence a soft pulse of dim blue light nested in the deck. Core, and she spoke the words that no human officer used lightly. Begin Precursor Strike Simulation 2-1. Classify under Omega Chain Red, and prepare message capsules for Allied observers. Inform them this is not escalation, it is enforcement. Through disruption. In accordance with precedent and proportional analysis of confirmed hostile action, the AI acknowledged with a low harmonic tone, and the lights along the command deck dimmed slightly as the Naraka adjusted trajectory, beginning the slow pivot. Toward the first calculated strike point, an orbital refinery hub tucked behind a minor gas giant. Defended only by semi-automated drones and patrolling corvettes, unaware they had already been mapped. Studied, then outclassed, there would be no casualties, only interruption. And that was the point, because the Black Ship's mission was not to burn worlds or shatter fleets, but to ensure the Velari never again mistook silence for submission, and never again assumed that humanity's restraint was weakness rather than discipline. Reese watched the trajectory align and exhaled through his teeth, his voice softer now, reflective not of fear, but of the weight of necessity. History won't know what we did here until long after it's over. Marin's eyes remained fixed on the forward display, the hollow curve of stars ahead offering. No judgment. History doesn't need to know, she said. It only needs to remember. The refinery over Kavros Delta was a skeletal lattice suspended in the shadow of a gas giant, its orbit masked by the planet's electromagnetic storms and shielded by 3 low-autonomy patrol corvettes whose security patterns had not changed in 57 cycles. And as the Naraka descended into the system, gliding just beneath the radiation thresholds, not one alarm was triggered, not one defense drone stirred from idle drift inside the refinery. Velari technicians conducted routine calibration of plasma. Taps, unaware that their entire command interface had been subtly reprogrammed through a synthetic virus encoded within a maintenance update. Packet dispatched from a compromised data relay they believed to be an Ascendancy military archive. Virus did not erase, disrupt, or destroy. It waited, perfectly still, until the moment the refinery's primary uplink sensed with the orbital transceiver, and then in less than 2 seconds, it redefined the facility's positional matrix, triggering its auto-safety. Protocol to displace by 3 degrees in error, so minor it seemed like a calibration fault, but one that silently initiated full operational lockdown, isolating every subsystem and forcing a self-seal across all modules. 3 corvettes received the automated distress ping and moved to investigate, their engines still burning standard formation routes, when a microburst from the Narakas stealth array flooded their sensors with quantum shadows, forcing all targeting systems into hard reboot and leaving the patrol units drifting blind, fully functional, yet effectively deaf inside the human ship. Lieutenant Reese monitored the response telemetry, each data spike a confirmation of success, and Commander Marin stood behind him with arms folded, her posture unchanged even as the Velari command station sent 5 low-priority distress signals. Across restricted frequencies signals which would reach Ascendancy High Command with full evidence of malfunction, but no trace of external attack. This is the strike pattern they're not prepared to counter, Reese said, eyes fixed on the holographic echo of the refinery's shutdown protocol, because it mirrors internal system decay, not external sabotage. And by the time they realize it's a pattern, half their infrastructure will be recalibrating itself into uselessness. Marin nodded once, then turned toward the center dais where a diplomatic capsule stood ready to deploy. Its message already encrypted, and addressed to 27 non-aligned systems, each one receiving the exact coordinates, timestamps, and system diagnostics of the event. "We let the galaxy see what we can do without lifting a weapon," she said, not as boast, not as warning, but as statement of doctrine. Because if restraint doesn't earn respect, it will at least remind them of the cost of underestimation. At her signal, the capsule launched from the Naraka's mid-hull bay, spiraling into FTL, burst toward the outer systems, where whispers of Earth's new posture had already begun to take shape in council halls and war rooms, and far behind them, the refinery remained intact, untouched, but offline. A throat that had suddenly forgotten how to speak, like a message no longer able to lie on the Ascendancy's central command world. Of Vel Tarin, deep beneath the layered strata of the High Spire Citadel, Chancellor Avera Kai Tal stood before the security archive, her veil drawn back in defiance of tradition, revealing the calcified markings of her lineage proof, not just of heritage, but of the authority to wage sanctioned war without the Council's consent. And she stared at the playback of the Kavros Delta incident for the third time in silence, watching as the refinery sealed itself without breach. Without fire, without trace, her war advisor, Lord Analyst Vrex, tapped a sequence into his interface, slowing the footage to a frame-by-frame crawl, and with a voice sharpened by unease he never showed before, he gestured toward the exact second when the system self-isolated. No damage signatures, no gravimetric displacement, no thermal bloom. This is a silent intrusion at a scale we didn't believe humans capable of. And what's worse, Chancellor, is that they want us to see it. Kaital did not move, her gaze fixed on the moment of shutdown, that precise stillness, where power surrendered not to destruction, but to instruction. "It is not war they're waging," she said slowly. "It's the removal of certainty." Behind her, a junior tactician approached, his breath shallow, his report already pulsing across the floor's information lattice before he spoke aloud. 23 systems have received verified diplomatic capsules from Earth. Each message contains the Kavros telemetry, along with citations of the Omega Clause, and a notice that Earth will not seek reparations, only that the Ascendancy acknowledge the genocide of Rexernine within 48 hours. In writing, before neutral observers, Kayatal's spines curled back in calculated stillness. Not anger, not shame, but strategy, because Earth's demands were not impossible. And that was precisely what made them dangerous. The humans had not asked for blood, territory, or the dismantling of fleets. They had asked for memory. And memory, once publicly admitted, would fracture the myth of Valari perfection that the Ascendancy had built for 600 years, and admission would not. And the threat. It would destroy the image of Control Vrex turned toward her, voice low, his formal cadence betraying tension rarely heard among his caste. "If we acknowledge the event, we collapse the legitimacy of prior purges. Our internal factions will question the mandates. The outlier colonies may resist authority, and the coalition itself could fracture." Tal met his gaze with the cold clarity of a ruler who had already seen the end of her own strategies. "And if we do not acknowledge it," she said, "the black ship will not ask again." The chamber fell into silence. Only the hum of deep power conduits reverberating through the spire floor. And it was in that silence that a new feed arrived. Covert satellite footage leaked from the Athari Trade Union, showing another refinery shutting down in identical fashion. This time over Myron's belt, the humans had struck again without firing a shot, and the galaxy had already begun to watch with open eyes and quiet judgment. Not to choose sides, but to prepare for the world after the Ascendancy, because Earth had changed the rules, and the rules were obeying. The Naraka held its position in the outer rim of the Varelian drift, nested within the blind curve of a decaying moon whose orbit masked emissions long enough for the next sequence of operations to initiate without detection. And inside the command deck, The crew worked in silence, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing they stood at the edge of something irreversible, Lieutenant. Reese coordinated with Earth Command via narrowband laser link. Each transmission compressed and parsed by onboard II subroutines that ensured zero latency drift, and as the confirmation packet returned signed by 3 members of the Joint Human Strategic Council, he turned toward Commander Marin with a single nod, eyes unreadable behind his interface lenses. Secondary proof of capability operation has been authorized. Target is the Valari DeepMind Logistics node over Chiron 3, their central extrapolator for colony resource optimization. And once it's compromised, any attempt to shift production routes will become a spiral of inefficient recalculations for at least 32 days. Marin moved toward the display where the projected timelines of ascendancy, economic adaptation, unraveled across a glowing field of cascading numbers, her gaze fixed not on the moment of impact, but on the aftershocks. The data loops that would trigger internal delays, missed refueling, political friction in trade corridors, each consequence compounding without violence. Deploy the attack package, she said, but include a full footprint. Make sure they're internal investigators find the infiltration keys, match them to Terran encryption, and see the Omega Clause watermark embedded in every subroutine. Reese paused for a fraction of a second, then spoke, not questioning her judgment, but clarifying intent. You want them to know we could have erased the node completely, and chose not to? Marin nodded once, slowly, because fear of what we could do will keep them restrained longer than any actual destruction ever could, and because the Valari don't understand restraint until it becomes their only option for survival across the galaxy. Council blocks convened emergency summits, each one reacting not to death tolls or fleet losses, but to the undeniable pattern. Unfolding with mathematical precision, humanity was not retaliating with fire. They were reshaping the calculus of interstellar power through silent control, and the Naraka had become the axis around which alliances pivoted and empires recalibrated in the Grex, cold arbiters of balance, who had not intervened in war since the Darzan collapse, issued a rare statement to the interstellar consortium, acknowledging that Earth's actions were systematically defensive and within proportional right, pending verifiable acknowledgement of harm, which meant that Earth had not only struck with precision, they had secured legitimacy inside the Naraka. Marin recorded a single diplomatic log entry for council submission, her voice steady, composed, and bound by the precision Earth now demanded from its leadership. We do not seek dominance, only memory. We do not strike to punish, but to prevent recurrence. And if the Valari will not remember their crime, then we will teach the galaxy to remember for them. In the Ascendancy's inner territories, panic did not roar through the streets or ignite in the halls of governance. It seeped, quiet and disciplined, into logistical briefings and supply chain audits, where increasingly erratic delays were met with blank terminal screens, and officers who asked too many questions were reassigned to outer colonies without ceremony, or cause fleet Strategos Drax stood before the central war table in the Verexim command atrium, surrounded by holograms of failing efficiency reports, trade collapses, and economic strains spiraling from the human strikes. And as the latest feed from Chiron 3 confirmed partial loss of predictive systems and mass rerouting failures across 4 sectors, he turned toward Chancellor Catal, his voice measured but no longer distant from consequence. Our internal cohesion is breaking down at the procedural level. This is not the erosion of power, Chancellor. This is the silent shattering of empire from its foundation upward. And your refusal to acknowledge the Rexer incident is no longer strategic. It is existential negligence. Catal remained seated on her elevated platform, her posture calculated and still, but her veil no longer shimmered with diplomatic resonance. It hung low, dim, a sign that her ceremonial alignment with unquestionable dominance had been breached. You presume that public contrition will repair the fractures, she said softly, when in truth, admitting guilt will simply accelerate our fragmentation and hand Earth the final moral supremacy they've engineered. This entire campaign to extract, but her words carried no force now, not because they were untrue, but because they had already been outmaneuvered. And Drax, once the loyal executor of her military will, no longer withheld what had become the quiet consensus of every high-ranking officer across the fleet. They did not engineer this. Chancellor, they revealed it, and we let them, because we assumed they would come with fire, not silence, and when they did not burn us, we failed to realize they were severing us from within. Kaidal's lower limbs tensed beneath her robes, not in anger, but in the recognition of something final, a realization that her control had not been wrested away. It had simply become irrelevant in a system that no longer obeyed its architect, as if summoned by the weight of that admission. The central display pulsed with an incoming diplomatic feed unsecured. Wideband and public it was from Earthrear. Admiral Nuoko appeared without formality, standing in the simple gray of her rank. No planetary banners behind her, no fleet insignia to signal triumph. Only her voice carried through with crystalline clarity to every political and military channel within Velari space. The Black Ship has completed its mission parameters under Omega Clause authorization, and no further action will be taken unless provoked. However, the memory of Rexer 9 is now preserved across 106 independent archives, shared freely, cross-verified, and immune to redaction, so that even if the ascendancy remains silent, the galaxy will not. There was no demand, no deadline, just history. Made permanent, and as the feed faded, Kaidal turned to Drax for the first time, not as a superior, but as a peer. What remains of an empire? She asked. When its silence is no longer feared, and Drax answered without hesitation, whatever memory chooses to spare. The Naraka held its final position in high orbit over Rexer 9, no longer cloaked, no longer silent, its matte black hull now gleaming in the filtered light of the local sun, as if daring the Velari to see it fully and name it not as weapon, but as witness. Because the mission was no longer one of concealment or retribution, it was commemoration on the surface below. Human envoys walked slowly through the preserved remains of the colony's central square, where no reconstruction had been permitted, no monument built, only the untouched footprint of devastation carefully maintained, the scorched outlines of homes and the charred foundation of the education dome left precisely as they were on the day of the purge. In orbit, Commander Marin stood before the main holosphere as neutral observers from the Grax, the K-Thou, and even 3 Velari civilian scientists transmitted their verification reports, each one affirming the authenticity of the site, the archival data, and the total absence of human falsification, because Earth had not altered the evidence, only protected it from being lost. Lieutenant Reese stood beside her, unusually quiet, the operation complete. The systems powered down, the last deployment capsule already sent to Pharos Station for permanent inclusion in the Galactic Archive. They didn't respond to the last transmission, he said, not with disappointment, not with hope, but with the recognition that silence from the Ascendancy now meant something different than it had before. They responded. Marin replied, they just did it by doing nothing, no denial. No accusation, no counterstrike, no apology, because they finally understood that history wasn't waiting for them to speak. On Veltarin, Chancellor K-Tal had not stepped forward to answer the public feed, nor had she activated emergency war powers or retaliated through proxy fleets, and her silence had stretched across 12 planetary cycles until the interstellar networks stopped waiting for her entirely. Instead, the outlier colonies began transmitting their own messages of recognition, one by one, sometimes simple acknowledgments, sometimes direct condemnations of the Velari High Command, and always with one phrase included somewhere in their message. Rexer 9 is remembered, Not forgiven, not avenged, remembered. In the political chambers of neutral worlds, where Earth had once been dismissed as volatile, inexperienced, too young to navigate galactic nuance, new alliances began forming, not built on fear, but on the strange, hard-earned respect that comes from watching a species wield restraint like a blade, not to cut, but to hold at the throat. Of silence until truth emerged, the Naraka did not leave orbit. It remained where the evidence was, where the memory lived, where its presence would say what politics refused to, and though it never fired a weapon in open space after the last precision strike, it remained the most strategically influential vessel in known space, because in a galaxy built on dominance, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had weaponized memory and won. The final council session convened not on Pharos Station, nor in the grand spires of Vel Taren, but aboard Irene 1, a neutral diplomatic barge orbiting a nameless moon in unclaimed space, chosen precisely because it belonged to no empire, no alliance, no history, a blank slate for the closing of a chapter none could afford to forget. Ambassador Nwoko stood at the center of the oval chamber, flanked not by Earth's military command or fleet guard, but by archivists, scholars, and a single elder from Rexer 9 who had lived through the purge by sheer chance and whose voice, when it came, would not be strategic, would not be barbed, it would be real across from her. Chancellor Catal stood veilless, unguarded, the final remnants of pride folded quietly in her hands, not discarded, but acknowledged for what they had cost, and for the first time since Earth's ascension into the interstellar order, the Velari leader bowed her head, not in submission, not in guilt, but in recognition. Nwoko spoke first, her voice steady, her words delivered not as accusation, but as final record. The mission of the Naraka is complete, not because the galaxy has punished the guilty, but because it has remembered the forgotten. And from this memory, we do not seek reparations, nor admission of strategic failure, nor restructuring of ascendancy power. Only this. She stepped aside, and the elder of Rexer 9, a quiet woman named Leora Etean, walked forward, carrying a single preserved soil sample from the colony square, its container etched not with any government seal, but with the names of the last recorded school children who had vanished when the atmosphere processors failed during the purge. She placed it on the table between them and said nothing, because everything had already been said. The council rose in silence, no applause, no ceremony, no declarations of new eras or forged peace, only the soft sound of archival recorders closing their entries, the quiet breath of decisions finalized, and the collective exhale of a galaxy that had come perilously close to forgetting what justice looked like when it was shaped not by retribution, but by restraint. The Naraka remained stationed above Rexer 9, not as a sentinel, not as a weapon, but as a monument. Its systems powered down except for the beacon that pulsed once every hour with the coordinates of the colony and the words in every known diplomatic tongue. Site of the Rexer 9 incident, preserved by Earth under Omega Protocol authority open to all species for unrestricted historical access. Over time, others come of Valari youth seeking truth, denied to them by state historians. Thal archivists refining their understanding of human resilience, even Grax mind scribes, who had once deemed humanity too volatile, now returned to update their records. This time under a new classification species of structured memory and strategic. Morality Commander Eva Marin did not return to Earth. She remained with the ship until her final day, not as its captain, but as its steward, a living interface between what had been done and what must never be repeated. And when she passed, her name was not etched into the hull. Instead, the Naraka transmitted one final message, logged into the Galactic Archive under sealed diplomatic timestamp. Mission complete. Humanity required no permission to remember, and the stars, once indifferent, held their silence a little longer that night.